Somewhere beneath your feet, right now, something enormous is moving. Not an earthquake, not a volcano. Something far stranger and far less visible. Deep inside the Earth, two invisible points are shifting in ways scientists have never recorded quite like this before. One of them is racing across the top of the planet faster than almost anyone predicted. The other is drifting in the completely opposite direction, quietly, patiently, for decades. For the first time in recorded history, both of Earth's magnetic poles are behaving strangely in the very same stretch of time. Compasses are being recalibrated. Navigation systems are being rewritten. As scientists who normally speak in careful, guarded language are using words like unprecedented and unmapped territory. So what exactly is happening to the poles of our planet? Is this dangerous? And why are two of the most stable points on Earth suddenly refusing to stay still? Stick around, because the real explanation is stranger and far more fascinating than most headlines let on. Here's why this story matters right now. Every single compass, every GPS system, every commercial airplane, every naval ship on Earth depends on an accurate model of our planet's magnetic field. When that field shifts unexpectedly, it isn't just a curiosity for scientists. It becomes a problem for pilots, sailors, and militaries around the world. That is exactly what has been happening. And by the end of this video, you'll understand precisely what is confirmed by scientists, what remains uncertain, and why so many people are talking about the poles this year. Let's start with the basics, because most people have never actually thought about what a magnetic pole really is. Deep inside the Earth, thousands of kilometers below where you're standing, there is a core made mostly of iron. Part of that core is liquid, swirling and churning constantly like a slow, invisible ocean of molten metal. That movement generates electric currents. And those electric currents generate Earth's magnetic field, the same invisible force that makes a compass needle point roughly north. Notice the word roughly, because the magnetic pole your compass points toward isn't the same as the geographic North Pole. The fixed point at the top of the globe, separate point called the magnetic North Pole, and unlike the geographic pole, it moves. Back in 1831, an explorer named James Clark Ross became the first person to locate the magnetic North Pole. At the time, it sat in the icy expanse of northern Canada. For more than a century after that, it barely seemed to budge, drifting slowly enough that generations of explorers could rely on roughly the same charts. Then something changed. Part 2 of this story is where the real tension begins, because starting in the 20th century, the magnetic North Pole stopped behaving the way scientists expected. Instead of wandering slowly, it began accelerating. Survey after survey found the pole creeping faster and faster across the Canadian Arctic. Year after year, decade to picture that speed. Imagine a single point beneath the Arctic ice moving the distance of a marathon every year without stopping. Scientists rely on something called the World Magnetic Model to track this movement and keep global navigation systems accurate. It's normally updated on a careful 5-year schedule. But in 2019, something forced an emergency unscheduled correction. The pole had moved faster than the existing model predicted. Fast enough that the small errors were becoming a real risk for high-precision navigation systems relying on it. That emergency update was the first sign that something bigger was happening. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. The pole didn't just keep moving quickly. It kept moving in a very specific direction, away from Canada and straight toward Siberia. Survey after survey confirmed the same trend. The pole crossing further and further, from its old Canadian Arctic home, marching steadily across the top of the world toward Russian territory. Then, according to the most recent official model, released in 2025, it happened. The magnetic North Pole officially crossed over, sitting closer to northern Russia than to Canada, for the first time since it was first located nearly 2 centuries earlier. For scientists, this wasn't some minor technical footnote. It was a geographic milestone. Closing out a journey the pole had been quietly making for generations, one survey at a time. Part 3 is where the story becomes even more interesting. It's because while all this was happening in the north, something completely different was unfolding at the opposite end of the planet. The South Magnetic Pole, sitting near Antarctica, was not racing anywhere. while its northern counterpart sprinted across the Arctic at tens of kilometers a year. The southern pole crept along at a fraction of that pace, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometers annually, drifting slowly offshore from Antarctica since roughly the 1950s. Two poles on the same planet moving at wildly different speeds. That alone would be an interesting scientific footnote. But here's what made researchers sit up and take notice. The two poles weren't just moving at different speeds. They were moving in essentially opposite directions relative to each other. The northern pole pressing steadily southward in longitude terms as it swings toward Siberia, while the southern pole continues, edging quietly northward along its own slow path. Then investigators uncovered something nobody expected. Geophysicists modeling both poles' trajectories realized that, because of this opposite drift, the north and south magnetic poles were on track to briefly share the exact same longitude, lining up along roughly the same north-south line across the globe, sometime in early 2026. According to researchers who study this pattern, that specific kind of alignment likely hasn't happened in many centuries. This is the real event behind the headlines, not a collision, not a collapse. A rare geometric alignment between 2 points that almost never sync up, each one moving to its own independent rhythm, briefly crossing paths in the mathematics of the planet's magnetic field. Part 4 is where we need to pause and separate solid, confirmed science from the more dramatic claims circulating online, because this is exactly the kind of story that tends to get exaggerated. You may have seen headlines suggesting the poles are crashing or that Earth's magnetic field is reversing. Those words sound terrifying. They are also, according to the scientists actually studying this data, not an accurate description of what's confirmed to be happening. Here's what a true magnetic reversal actually means. Over Earth's long geological history, the entire magnetic field has occasionally flipped completely, with north and south essentially swapping places, while the field itself temporarily weakens during the UHE transition. The geological record shows this has happened many times, but on a timescale of roughly every few 100,000 years, an almost unimaginably slow process by human standards. Scientists studying the current data have been direct and consistent on this point. There is no sign of an imminent full reversal. The field is not collapsing. What is happening is smaller, more localized, and far better understood. The poles independently wandering due to shifting currents deep in Earth's liquid outer core. It's a completely normal process that has been recorded in smaller ways for nearly 2 centuries. So the honest, evidence-based version of this story is this. One pole is moving unusually fast. The other is moving unusually slowly, and in a different direction. Together, they're on track for a rare, striking alignment. None of that equals a global magnetic collapse, and none of it equals a reversal happening right now. The truth was even more shocking in its own quiet way. It's not because the planet is falling apart, but because the real explanation reveals just how dynamic and alive the interior of our planet actually is, constantly shifting, constantly changing, whether we notice it or not. Part 5 brings us to why this actually matters for people living their ordinary lives right now, far away from any laboratory or research station. Every time the magnetic field shifts, even gradually, it changes something called declination, the small but important difference between magnetic north and true geographic north at any given location on Earth. Pilots use declination corrections to fly precise routes. Ship captains use it to navigate accurately across open ocean. Modern GPS systems, autonomous vehicles, and even some smartphone compass apps quietly depend on regularly updated magnetic models to stay accurate. When the pole moves faster than expected, as it did leading up to that emergency 2019 correction, those systems can drift out of alignment if the underlying models aren't kept current. That's a real, practical consequence, not a dramatic one, but a genuinely important shimmering lights usually seen near the poles. Regions that reliably see northern lights today could gradually shift over the coming decades as the magnetic field structure continues evolving. Scientists also monitor how changes in the field interact with the upper atmosphere and satellite systems, watching for subtle shifts in space, weather exposure, effects that are considered real and worth tracking, even if they remain modest for now. None of this points toward catastrophe. It points toward a planet that has always been quietly, continuously changing beneath our feet, usually far too slowly for any of us to notice within a single human lifetime. except perhaps right now. So here is the honest answer to the question this video began with. Are both of Earth's poles failing? No. Are they doing something rare, measurable, and genuinely fascinating in the very same stretch of time? Yes, and scientists have the data to prove it. The North Magnetic Pole has spent nearly 2 centuries crossing the Arctic, recently completing its journey from Canada to Russia, moving fast enough to force emergency updates to the models the world depends on. The South Magnetic Pole has spent decades drifting slowly the opposite way off the coast of Antarctica. And for a brief moment in recorded history, their paths are lining up in a way that hasn't occurred in centuries. That is not a planet falling apart. That is a planet quietly reminding us how much is still moving beneath the solid ground we take for granted. Precise, measurable, endlessly in motion, and still. After nearly 200 years of careful observation, capable of surprising the scientists who study it most closely, what do you think it would take for people to actually notice a change like this in everyday life? Would you have believed this story if you'd only seen the scary headlines and nothing else? Let us know in the comments below. And if this video helped you separate the real science from the sensational headlines, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true stories hiding just beneath the surface of our planet.